Okay, what's up? This is going to be a game between Paul Morphy playing as the white pieces and someone called Charles Le Carpentier, French name, I think that's how you'd say it. Charles Le Carpentier. I think Paul Morphy was like 11 or 12 when he played this. So anyway, let's get into it. So, yo, e4. Dominating the center, bringing out the bishop and the queen, you know what I'm saying? e5, let's not mess about. Let's play some chess, you know what I'm saying? Okay, whatever. Okay, knight to f3. So Morphy's attacking the pawn. That pawn's all by itself. Who's going to protect it? Could be the pawn. That's, I think, called Philidor. But remember, that pawn would then block the bishop. It's not as good. This knight to c6 is maybe better. This is a really common position. So a common way for white to proceed. You're trying to get this pawn, put pressure straight away from the start of the game. If you bring your bishop here, you're threatening the one piece that's protecting the pawn. So that's just generally a good idea. That's called the Roy Lopez. So a common thing is that black will then play a6 to try and get rid of the bishop, or to sort of force it to make a choice. Either you take the knight or you get out of the way or something. Usually white will keep pressure, but let's say you took the knight, black will usually take back away from the center to open up the queen, and for another reason, but it does seem like white can now win the pawn. Just as an example, so that's kind of a good way to put pressure straight away. It doesn't quite work because black can play queen to d4, and I think also there might be another move as well that works, but you know, this threatens the knight and the pawn, so white is sort of forced to, well, I guess retreat the knight. This probably makes sense, and then black can take the pawn with check. And the position is not necessarily bad for white, but it's not like winning. It's like being on serve in tennis. White is expecting an advantage from the opening. So anyway, that's just a common thing that happens. Another common move is bishop to c4, which we'll see later. This pawn is very vulnerable from the start of any game. f7. It's only being protected by the king. So a very common thing with beginners is they'll try to bring their queen, say, to f3 or here to attack that pawn. But anyway, okay, so, but Morphy played, oh, by the way, I forgot to mention, he didn't even have a rook. Man, he don't need that, man. He's going to win anyway. So straight away, rook sort of sacrificed at the start of the game. Sorry, I forgot to mention that. So d4, this puts a lot of pressure on this pawn. Black could protect it again. I don't know, I guess there's a few possibilities, but they're kind of passive. There's a lot of pressure, and if black just defended, then white can sort of try to keep coming up. I mean, now this move is probably stronger, because now this piece is actually pinned, it cannot move at all. And even white could then threaten play that move later. Anyway, so instead black took the pawn straight away. Now I guess if there's a lesson from this game, it's that a concept you should know: you don't have to play the automatic move. So the automatic move here would be, the knee-jerk reaction would be, oh, they took my pawn, I better take it back. Obviously not with the queen, but with the knight. And then I'm not even sure. Maybe black should exchange the knights. Maybe he should bring another piece out. I don't know with that sort of position. But instead, just to show you that it's possible, white just plays bishop to c4. He's not worried about just a single pawn. He wants to keep developing. This pawn isn't really going to last long. It's already got two pieces attacking it. Black could try to desperately keep it, but anyway, it's more important to develop pieces and put pressure on your opponent. What did black play? Bishop to b4, check. Normally, a check like that, any move you make, you want there to be a purpose to it. It's got to make your position better. And I don't know if that's a good move or not. It's easy for white to defend with the bishop. Obviously, it is a bit more threatening because of this pawn being here. The knight can't block there because it would get taken. So anyway, white plays an interesting move, c3. This seems dangerous because it walks right into the sort of the other pawn. Normally that'd be sort of good. It just attacks the bishop and says, well, that was pointless, you have to go back now. It does open up the queen a diagonal. This can be bad because it blocks the knight, but here it looks like there'll be exchanges. Anyway, black chooses to take it. Again, the automatic move would be to take either with the knight or the pawn. This does have the weakness though, if white takes, these pawns are isolated and they're not as strong now because they're sort of by themselves and they would have to be protected by pieces. But with this sort of game, it's very quick. Morphy's just attacking. There's a good chance this game doesn't last very long. But again, Morphy doesn't play the automatic move. And just by the way, this is a dangerous position. This pawn is threatening to move forward, and then that's a discovered check, and then white would lose his queen. He can move it to block the check, but then he'll still lose it anyway. So white plays the castle. That escapes the threat to the queen, and just keeps, developing. Protects the king, and this rook is getting closer to the center where it can attack the black king, for example. Again, here I think black he's making mistakes in terms of just trying to get lots of pawns. He takes another pawn here. Just something to keep in mind. It's like he could have just developed. That might have been smarter. If he takes this pawn, white can take back with the bishop, and that's kind of good for white. He gets another piece out. It's on a good diagonal. It even threatens this pawn. You don't want to just take things without considering what would happen afterwards. Even you could play the pawn here, and even if the pawn isn't protected, white can just take it with the queen. That's kind of forced because this pawn is attacking two pieces. White has to take, and sometimes that's good to just sort of force your opponent to take a piece and put it in an awkward position. Here this is probably fine for white, but I'm just saying it's something that should be considered. So black took the pawn. It makes sense for white to take it. That's the only reasonable move. And yeah, if you look at this point in time, so white has three pieces developed, and the queen is also on a good, has a nice open line. White has a pawn in the center. He's lost, several pawns, or I guess 2 pawns down. But yeah, looking good. Black, this is a huge mistake. Black plays his bishop back to f8. There are much better ways to defend this pawn. And again, if you're playing in Morphy style, you don't have to just protect pawns and protect things. You can make counter threats. There's something black should have considered bringing out his knight to block it, even if white can move his pawn up. Sorry, I should demonstrate. So black brings the knight and then attack the knight. But I don't know, like the knight can probably just move forward, and that might be a little dangerous for black, but he might have more chance of getting in the game. Anyway, so black moves back. Now what did white do here? So white has a few options. I would have thought developing the knight would make sense, to try and bring it out. Bringing the rook to the center makes sense. White chooses to push the pawn forward. I don't know if that threatens anything specifically, but it makes sense to try to, the closer white can get here. I don't think white cares much if he loses this pawn, if he can sort of get rid of a pawn, or especially with the bishop and these other pieces that are pointing, it can create a bit more pressure. If it gets exchanged, then you've got this open line for the rook. The other thing, by being here, it's quite forward and advanced. It's sort of cramping black's position. The knight would like to come here, but it can't now, for example. Again, I think this seems like a mistake to me. It's probably not a terrible move. Black plays d6. So this, look at the position. Black only has 1 piece out, white has 3, and again the queen's in a good position. Okay, a normal move for white to play here would be to exchange, but again, Morphy shows you don't just have to do the move that seems obvious. He brings his knight to the center first. I think a lot of masters do this. They don't exchange straight away. They kind of build pressure and set things up, and then that way, when they're ready, they can, maybe he'll swap the pawn, maybe he'll advance it, maybe he'll bring his knight forward or his queen. But the more pieces he's got set up ready for something, there's a tactic that could come up. More ways for your opponent to go wrong, I guess. Black takes the pawn. Again, if you look at it so far, black has been making mostly pawn moves. Look at the back row. There's only one piece out now. Now white, white could trade queens, but that's sort of bad. White wants to keep the queen for the attack. If you're attacking, the queen's dangerous. And white's way behind in material, mainly because of the rook. So he wants to sort of keep pieces on the board. So he takes the pawn with the knight. This sort of makes sense. He could take with the rook and put black in check, but then black can take it back. This is good because it threatens the discovered check. The knight can now move away, maybe take the knight. That would be check, and then the knight can take the queen. So it's a threatening move. And it's maybe better than the bishop because the bishop's on a useful diagonal. You don't want to lose the bishop. Okay, black takes the queen. This sort of makes sense, but it's still probably a mistake because of what happens. Next, black wants to get rid of the queen. It's a threat to the king. Now, okay, the obvious move is white takes back. It needs to take back. It just lost the queen. But then this position becomes very equal. Black can trade the knight. It can then attack the bishops and develop other pieces. White doesn't have to, again, you don't have to just take it back. White has discovered checks, so it's interesting to consider taking the knight. The only thing is that doesn't quite work because this rook is not protected, and black can just take the rook, and in fact that'll be checkmate for black. So it looks like white's in a tricky position. He does have, so he plays bishop to f7 check. That seems like sort of a good check to do anyway. Black probably doesn't want to move to this file because then white can take the queen with check, and black's in a tricky position. He can't really block with the bishop because then black can just take it with the rook, for example, or with the knight, and then there's another threatened thing. I haven't sort of analyzed this position in detail, but I'm just trying to explain some of the basic logic. So black moves his king forward, but this is walking into another problem. Now the discovered check works. For example, if white takes the knight, it's a double check. The knight is putting him in check and the rook. This is a situation where black has to move. I mean, he could take the rook, but then the knight is still in check, so that's not allowed. He could try and block the rook, but then the knight isn't getting blocked. So he has no choice but then to move his king, and that's kind of threatening, but it turns out, like for instance, black can just take the bishop. It's not protected now. So it's a bit tricky. White actually decides to play a double check, but on the other side, which is a pretty crazy move. Now let's say black can't move here, the bishop's blocking it. He could, again, he doesn't really want to go on that file because then white can take the queen with check and kind of keep following through. He can take the rook with the knight. The game ends really kind of quick now. So black takes the bishop, and then I actually, because I was reading this game online, hopefully I'll attach a link. I kept trying to think, rather than looking at the move, think, what's the next move? And at this point I got kind of stuck. It seems impossible for white. The rook can't move. It's pinned to the king by the queen. If white takes the queen, then that's terrible. Black can then take the knight, and white's got no chance. The bishop can't check at this point. It takes too long if the knight's going to come out. And it looks really awkward with this knight, but then I realized, oh, okay, so white must take the rook. That makes sense. Okay, so he gets a rook, that's good, and black's in check, so then white can keep attacking. What I didn't notice is that that's actually checkmate, so the game's over. The black king can't move here, the bishop's attacking it. These are both covered by the knight, and the rook covers this file. So I don't know, I was blown away when I saw that last move. And I'm sure the thing is, Morphy would have seen it coming, and his opponent didn't really play very well, but yeah, this is a pretty exciting game, I think. Yeah, I guess that's about it. Very cool checkmate. That's very rare to see, like a knight in the corner, h8, giving checkmate, and in such a cool sort of way. Like every piece, this bishop's involved. The only white piece that wasn't involved was this knight. But look at black's pieces. This rook, bishop, this bishop went back, and this knight did nothing. These pawns, I guess pawns don't really matter so much, and black's king is out you know, white's king is nice and safe, was never even really threatened. So anyway, hope you enjoyed that video. See you later.